And so we're at the point where we have issued a record of decision on some of the excavations we need to do, the remaining excavations for soil removal, and that's what we'll be doing in 2015 and 2016. And by the end of 2016, this whole Site 6 ought to be ready for transfer to the city of San Francisco. Okay, so good job, Darius. You're almost there. So from there, let's talk a little bit about where we're headed into, and that is known as Site 12. If you're a resident of Treasure Island, it's better known as your neighborhood. And Site 12 is the largest site on Treasure Island. It's 93 acres. And it is radiologically impacted. And there's a history to that many of you already know that I'll go over very quickly here. Darius, if you could just stop for a second before we enter. So there's different programs that the Navy has. One of them has circular contaminants, and there are contaminants in this area from its previous uses. There were ammunition bunkers back in the 1940s and 50s, and some even into the early 60s that were here. And the ammo bunkers, of course, stored small arms ammunition. But in addition to that, there were all kinds of other activities in different places. There was a tower, an incinerating tower, that operated from 1955 to late 1959 that burned trash from the island. There were two main places during that era to take the trash off of Naval Station Treasure Island. And you have to remember that when the Navy has a naval station, particularly on a little island in the middle of the bay like this, it's actually a little village. So it had all kinds of things that would make up a little village. And they generated a lot of waste like any village would. So there was a landfill on Yerba Buena Island, a proper landfill there. And there were solid waste disposal areas along the perimeter, the northernmost perimeter of the island. And those are located where Site 12 is, which means that where the solid waste disposal areas were is where the Navy in four different phases built housing units. So they compacted these solid waste disposal areas, okay? And then they graded it, brought in more dirt, compacted that, and then over the span of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they built housing. And if you're a resident there, you know that there's the housing is referred to as either 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, or 1400s. 1100s and 1200s being built first, and then the 1400s were built as late as 1988 and 1989. So the housing wasn't all built in the same in the same decade. But what we do know that they have in common is what the Navy did is it spread out, as most developers would when they develop housing. They want a very level platform, so they took the soil from the solid waste disposal areas, the topmost soil, and they spread it around the entire site. So what the Navy's found, particularly in the last few years, is that there's low-level radiological objects spread across Site 12. And there's some of those radiological objects are associated with training. Some of them are a little higher level than just glow-in-the-dark gauges. And those are found mostly in the solid waste disposal areas around the perimeter of the neighborhood. We're going to go to each one of those solid waste disposal areas, and I'll talk a little bit about it. And you'll see what the Navy's doing. But the process is really clear, what we have to do. We are going to remove all of the solid waste in the disposal area, and then we're going to get what's called in the environmental cleanup business as free release. Free release applies to if you are radiologically impacting an area, you have to prove that you've cleaned it up, or that where it didn't need cleanup, that there is no radiation above any background levels left. So the Navy is committed to those two goals of getting a free release and cleaning up all the remaining solid waste in those solid waste disposal areas. We've done most of the solid waste removal already, but we still have a ways to go. And if you're residents and have heard me talk about this before, I do have to tip my hat to you, because it's not easy being in a neighborhood, living with the Navy, doing cleanup. And we understand that. And we try our best to minimize that, but it's not an easy process. And you're going to see an acceleration of the process. The good news, from my standpoint, is that you're going to see an acceleration of the process. We're going to do more digging and more cleanup in 2015 and 2016. And after 2015 and 2016, we're going to be, in many ways, over the hump. We'll have some more work to do in 2017, 2018, but when it comes to solid waste disposal areas, we ought to be done by the end of 2016.